We have made it to the 2026 NFL Draft here in season number 2 of the Denver Broncos franchise here on Madden 25. An opportunity for us to bolster this roster after making the playoffs last year, looking to add some more pieces to set this team up for the future. Last episode, we recapped the playoffs. We saw that the Dallas Cowboys beat the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. We went through free agency, agreeing to some extensions with some of our most notable players, specifically a $100 million deal for Nick Bonito. I wanted to make a splash in free agency, preferably on the offensive side of the football, being that offense was our weakness last year, but we couldn't. It was a weak free agency class. We tried to get Isaiah Likely. It didn't happen. So we weren't able to make a big splash through free agency, and we haven't made a big trade, but I'm open to that idea here in the draft. There were some other moves around the league. The Dolphins are starting to sell the farm. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey both with new teams. Vita Vea on the move to the Eagles. Jonathan Allen to the Rams. And Devontae Adams going to Seattle to join their likely rookie quarterback. One of the many scenarios we talked about in the last episode, which was the draft preview. And of course, we come into today with 2 first-rounders, including the 5th overall pick, thanks to our big trade down in last year's draft with the Jets. We expect Cade Klubnik and Avery Johnson to go 1 and 2 in some order. And then who knows how many other quarterbacks go in the first round in what is one of the most talented QB classes in recent memory. The dilemma for us at number 5, if we keep the pick, is do we pick one of these great defensive prospects like Peter Woods, Avion Terrell, Colin Wright, or Caleb Downs? Do we pick one of the offensive linemen? That's one of our bigger needs. Or do we pick one of the quarterbacks? Bo Nix is 26 years old, and it has taken him a while to really figure things out. But I think he has, and maybe we do have our franchise QB. The mock drafts had the Browns picking Avion Terrell number 1 overall. I just can't see it. Yeah, they drafted Cam Ward late in the first round last year, but with an opportunity to get a prospect like Klubnik or Johnson, I feel like that has to be the move. This mock has us picking Jalen Rivers, the offensive tackle out of Miami. Other than the fact that he's 24 years old, it's hard to argue with picking an offensive tackle at number 5 because, again, I think that's one of the areas that this team really needs to improve upon. I am fascinated to see what happens after the top 2 picks. I feel like the draft really opens up at number 3 with the Titans. It seems like they like Caleb Downs, the safety out of Ohio State. But are they really going to pick a safety at 3? A lot of the other quarterbacks are not going in the first round in this mock draft, but teams are going to get desperate. And as I said in the last episode, I don't think this is the draft for teams who need quarterbacks. I think this is the draft for teams who think they need quarterbacks because next year's crop is probably going to be a lot worse than this one. I think Dante Moore looks like a first rounder from Oregon, maybe Arch Manning from Texas, and of course there probably will be some surprises. But otherwise, there does not look to be an elite crop of prospects at the position like there is this year. So let's get this show on the road, shall we? In the NFL draft, this is where teams construct themselves and are able to build powerhouses. You got to get impact players in the first and second rounds, but you also have to continue to fill out depth and get some hits in the later rounds, and we're certainly hoping to do that today with our 2 first-rounders at number 5 and number 27, along with the rest of our draft capital. As always, I'm open to moving up or down, given the right deal, but I think I'll be happy to stand pat with where we are, assuming the board plays out as I expect. So that starts with the Cleveland Browns here at number 1 overall. Which quarterback will they select? Cade Klubnik from Clemson or Avery Johnson from Kansas State? And then once they choose their quarterback, I think the dilemma turns to what are they going to do with Cameron Ward? Because obviously he's still going to have some value, even though he didn't have a great rookie season last year. I don't think he's going to fetch that much in a trade, however, given how good this year's crop of quarterbacks is. He was picked late in the first round last year, and I don't think the Browns are going to make that value up. I would expect a late day 2 pick is probably the price for him. So with the first pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns select Cade Klubnik, quarterback out of Clemson. So the Browns are going to pick a QB, and ultimately they think Cade Klubnik is the guy who's going to lead their team into the future. 6'2", 205 pounds. I think he's got a little bit more pure arm talent and upside as a passer than Avery Johnson does, which is, I think, why the Browns ultimately lean towards him. 87 passing touchdowns to just 10 interceptions over the last 2 seasons. Klubnik led Clemson to an undefeated regular season, helping lead them to the college football playoff semifinal, where they lost to the University of Oregon. 76 with hidden development, pretty good arm talent, pretty solid ability as a runner. I don't think he's quite as accurate and as consistent as the Heisman winner Avery Johnson, who we all expect to be the selection here. With the second pick, the Seattle Seahawks select Avery Johnson, quarterback out of Kansas State. So as expected, it is these top 2 quarterbacks going at number 1 and number 2. Avery Johnson's a little bit thinner than Klubnik, 6'2", 188. A former 4-star recruit who has started for the Wildcats over the last 2 years. This season, he threw for 37 touchdowns and was intercepted just once to go along with 12 touchdowns on the ground en route to winning the Heisman Trophy. The one piece of bragging rights we do hold over him is that he is 0-2 as a starter all-time against the Kansas Jayhawks, but he is certainly not the reason why we beat them this year, throwing for 311 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's an 80 overall, and he is the, to my knowledge, only superstar X-Factor player in the entire draft class. What a selection for the Seattle Seahawks. It looks like they've got their guy. So the top 2 quarterbacks are off the board, and now that poses the question of what happens next. I think the Titans are in the market for a quarterback, but I think 3 is a little bit early to pick any of these guys. Do they pick an offensive lineman, or do they go with one of these top defensive players? They've been linked to Caleb Downs out of Ohio State, but it does feel a little bit early to pick a safety at number 3. So with the third pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Tennessee Titans select Caleb Downs, defensive back out of the Ohio State University. The Titans see positional value, and they will flush it down the toilet. And with a player of Caleb Downs' caliber, I get it. This guy has a chance to be fitted for a gold jacket in 20 years, and the Titans figure, let's draft the best football player in the draft and worry about positional value later. 83 overall, hidden development. I believe he does have superstar. He's been a great player since his true freshman season at Alabama, and now during the last 2 seasons with Ohio State, an interception, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 fumbles recovered this year. And with the 4th pick, the Washington Commanders select Peter Woods, defensive tackle out of Clemson. So again, unsurprisingly, another one of these top defensive playmakers is off the board. Woods, who had an electric season up the middle for the Clemson defensive line, goes in the top 5 to replace Jonathan Allen. Woods had 16 TFLs and 12.5 sacks this year. When we played against Clemson back in Week 5, he put on a show. 11 tackles, 3 for a loss, and 2 sacks. 81 overall with superstar development for the 21-year-old junior. It looks like Washington got themselves a stud in the middle of their defensive line. And that brings us on the clock here at number 5. No major surprises in the top 4. This is about what we could have expected. The top 2 corners, Terrell and Wright, are still on the board. All of the offensive linemen are still here as well. And of course, there are plenty of quarterbacks still here if that's the route we want to go with, or if somebody else wants to trade up. I think the 2 teams that would make the most sense in a trade are the Buccaneers at 8 and the Giants at 11, moving up for a quarterback. But I would rather not move this pick and stay. Going into the draft, there were 2 guys I really liked and would feel good about picking at number 5. One of them was Caleb Downs. I agree with the Titans. I don't care about positional value. Caleb Downs has Hall of Fame upside. But the other player I really like is still on the board, and that's who we're going to pick. So the question is, who is it? Assuming it's one of these guys at the top, you would think it's one of the top corners or one of the top offensive linemen. O-line is our need. Yes, we signed Rasheed Walker at offensive tackle. But to get a guy like Emory Jones or Tristan Lay to protect Bo Nix for the next decade, assuming Bo Nix is the guy, makes a lot of sense. But then you've got these 2 corners, Avion Terrell and Colin Wright, 2 of the best cornerback prospects of the last decade. Corner isn't a huge need for us, but the value might be too good to pass up. With the 5th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Colin Wright, defensive back from Stanford. So we are going on the defensive side of the ball. And look, I get that offensive line is the bigger need for us. I get that it's a really good cornerback class down the board. But with the 5th overall pick, we cannot be fixated on need. We've got to pick the best football player on the board, and I think Colin Wright might be the best football player in this draft. To pair him opposite of Patrick Surtain sounds like a great idea to me. 6 foot, 190 pounds. Wright tests pretty well athletically. He ran a 4.46 40-yard dash. He's got long arms, and he checks off all the boxes physically in terms of what you look for as an NFL corner. But what gets you most excited is when you turn on the tape. This guy is sticky in coverage. In man, he does not let you create any separation. In zone, he knows exactly where he has to be to make a play on the receiver or on the football. Sure, he doesn't quite have the ball skills or the athletic upside that, say, Avion Terrell does. But over the last 2 years, the guy has allowed 26 catches in coverage. That's not a lot. Now, granted, he has missed some games over the last couple of years, but still, 1.5 receptions per game is not a lot. And if we compared that to Avion Terrell, yes, the interceptions are a lot higher. Terrell has allowed nearly 100 catches over the last 2 years. He's played some extra games with their playoff run this year, and he's done a better job staying healthy. But I think Colin Wright is the best pure cover player, not just in this draft, but I have seen enter the NFL in a long time. I talked about in the draft preview the idea of how he or Avion Terrell fits on their defense. You would think that Avion Terrell might be the better natural complement to Patrick Surtain because Surtain is more the shutdown island corner and Terrell can be the big play guy. But my thought process is, let's put an island on one side, an island on the other side, and quarterbacks are not going to be able to throw it to the outside receivers. Colin Wright is an 82 overall with hidden development. He is the 4th-ranked player in the draft. 82 man coverage, 83 zone. He's a good tackler as well. Much better in run defense and just tackling overall compared to Avion Terrell. That's another plus in his game. I think he might be the best football player in this draft. And again, I get that corner isn't a huge need for us, but we've got other chances to fill out needs. At number 5, it's got to be about value. So the next question is, how is he going to get on the field? Because we're pretty deep at corner. Well, my thought is Riley Moss is probably the odd man out. But that doesn't necessarily mean we would get rid of him. If we drafted Caleb Downs, Moss would stay at corner. But since we have drafted a corner in Colin Wright, I think moving Riley Moss to safety would work. He has the skill set for it. So going into next year, if Colin Wright does well in camp, him and Surtain would be on the outside, Chris Abrams draining the slot, and then Savon Revel would be the special teams ace and backup. So let's continue through the first round as we've got our first trade of the day. The Buccaneers are moving up just 2 spots, giving away their 1st, 2nd, and 5th to climb up to number 6. The team they're jumping is the Raiders. Assuming the Buccaneers are looking at a quarterback, they're not necessarily trying to jump the Raiders. I don't think that's something Las Vegas is considering with Jalen Daniels, but they're trying to prevent some other QB-hungry team from jumping them so they can still land their guy. With the 6th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Connor Wegman, quarterback out of Texas A&M. So it's Connor Wegman who will likely be the long-term starting quarterback for the Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield has regressed quite a bit. He's coming off a disappointing season, and the Bucs think Wegman can be their man for the future. Led college football in passing yards this year, 38 touchdowns to just 8 interceptions, completing 69% of his passes. Wegman, of course, led Texas A&M to the national championship, where he played well in the championship game, throwing 4 touchdowns in the loss to Oregon. 75 overall with only normal development, but I don't think it's all doom and gloom for Wegman because he'll get to sit behind Baker Mayfield. He's not going to be thrusted into action, and I think that could help his development. With the 7th pick, the Las Vegas Raiders select Avion Terrell, defensive back from Clemson. So the top 2 corners in this draft both end up in the AFC West. And if we feel like we made the wrong choice between Wright and Terrell, we're going to know about it because we're going to get to see Avion Terrell twice a year. The best ball skills in this year's draft, 6 interceptions in each of the last 2 seasons. He's a good cover player, but certainly not on the level that Colin Wright is, which is ultimately the big difference between the two of them in my opinion. Terrell is an 80 overall, so ratings-wise, he is a little bit worse than Wright, but he's only 21 years old. He does have superstar development, And the fact that he has 88 catching leads me to believe he's going to have some really nice abilities and will continue to be a ball hawk at the NFL level. With the 8th pick, the Chicago Bears select Emory Jones Jr., offensive tackle out of LSU. Definitely a guy we considered at number 5. I think Jones is the best offensive line prospect in this year's draft, and I'm not surprised to see him be the first one off the board before Tristan Lay from Clemson and Jalen Rivers from Miami. I think Jones is the best pass-protecting tackle in this year's class. Really consistent over the last 2 years. He's a good run blocker as well. He's played both right and left tackle for LSU, and he's going to come in as a 78 overall. Caleb Williams just got himself a really nice starting lineman. I would expect Jones, who played at left tackle last year, to stay on the left side with the Bears. With the 9th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Los Angeles Rams select Noah Thomas, wide receiver out of Texas A&M. The top receiver is off the board and the second Aggie in the top 10. Noah Thomas being the top receiver gone is not necessarily a surprise. He's been the top projected guy for a while, but of course, he did miss the entire college football playoff with a broken fibula. He came back healthy through the combine. He's going to be cleared for training camp, coming off a strong year with 884 yards in just 10 games and 23 touchdowns over the last 2 years. He complements the other receivers they have on their team really well. He gives them something that they don't already have with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. I'm not sure who their long-term quarterback is going to be. They do have Shedeur Sanders on the roster, who they're currently grooming behind Matthew Stafford. But regardless, that quarterback is going to have a nice long-term receiver tandem with Thomas and Puka. We've got a trade here at number 10. The Philadelphia Eagles are moving up 4 spots here with the New England Patriots, jumping their rival, the New York Giants, who are obviously a quarterback destination. You'd figure that the Eagles aren't looking at a quarterback, probably another position. I would guess one of the offensive tackles. With the 10th pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Nico Iamaleava, quarterback out of the University of Tennessee. A bombshell here at the 2026 draft. The Eagles have moved up, jumped the Giants for a quarterback. So let's talk about the prospect they're getting here with Nico Iamaleava. 6'6", 210 pounds, former 5-star recruit with some of the best pure arm talent in this year's draft. The kid's got an absolute cannon. He's got loads of upside, and at only 21 years old, it might take some time, but he's got the skills to figure it out. As a sophomore, he completed 72% of his passes. This year as a junior, he only completed 65, but his interception total went down from 10 to 1. Despite that, Nico's record at Tennessee is barely above 500 as a starter. Jalen Hurts has not been that great over the last 2 years. He missed some time in 2024 and was mediocre. And then this year, he really just was not that good. The Eagles have shown an aggressiveness to picking a quarterback when it looks like they already have one on the roster. But remember what I said earlier. This is not a draft for the teams who need quarterbacks. It's a draft for the teams who think they need one. So the Giants now, who were eyeing up Nico Iamaleava, are going to pick a different quarterback. Malachi Nelson out of Boise State, who has recently entered this class. I think his accuracy is right up there with Avery Johnson as the top 2 most accurate quarterbacks in the draft. The redshirt sophomore really developed this past offseason, and it showed with the year he had with the Broncos. But he's only a 69 overall. Nice. With normal development. So in terms of rating, the Giants cannot be thrilled with how this has played out for them, and it looks like Malachi Nelson's athletic traits are not going to translate as much as we thought. 5 quarterbacks have been picked in the top 11. That means the other teams who need quarterbacks might be looking to panic and trade up for some of those guys, while the other top non-quarterbacks continue to fall. We do have a trade here at number 12, but it's not from a team who needs a quarterback. The Ravens are going to send their first and second rounders to move up 12 spots with the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, this is not going to be a quarterback, but what direction is Baltimore looking at? Ultimately, they're headed to the defensive side of the ball. The first edge rusher off the board, it's Nick Scorton from Texas A&M, the third Aggie selected here in the first round. Going into last year's draft, Nick Scorton probably would have been the first or second defensive player picked had he declared for the draft, but he decided to stay in school, and I think that was a mistake. 15.5 sacks as a junior, just 8.5 this year in extra games played since they made it to the national championship. He had 1.5 sacks through the 3 playoff games, so not bad, but not spectacular either. He did have 4 TFLs in the national championship against Oregon, but was virtually a ghost in the semifinal game against Michigan. He's a 79 overall, but only has normal development. With the 13th pick, the Cincinnati Bengals select Jermaine Matthews Jr., cornerback out of The Ohio State University. The second Ohio State defensive back in the top half of the first round. I imagine the Bengals were looking at Scorton. I think pass rush is their biggest need. I'm surprised they didn't go with one of the other edge rushers, Patrick Payton or Reuben Bain. But I do like Jermaine Matthews Jr. as well, just 21 years old, only normal development, but he's really developed into a good cover player, can play on the inside and on the outside at corner, and we'll see if it translates to the NFL. With the 14th pick, the New England Patriots select Azariah Thomas. Thomas was one of the most improved players in the country last year. 4 interceptions, including 1 in the first-round playoff game against Texas. He only allowed 25 receptions, cutting his total from last year in half. The story of this draft so far has been the QBs and DBs. Within the top 14 picks, we have 5 quarterbacks and 5 defensive backs. And I think Thomas is going to be one of the better ones. Him and Christian Gonzalez together is frightening. Micah Pettis, offensive tackle out of Ole Miss, goes to the Saints. The way this guy can move at 6'7", 360 is pretty incredible. Only normal development, but he is a 78 overall. The Saints have whiffed on a lot of the offensive linemen they've drafted in early years, but they're hoping that he can be the long-term starter at right tackle with Talise Fuanga at left tackle. Many of the other offensive linemen are slipping, though. Jalen Rivers is still here. Tristan Lay, surprisingly, is still here, as are all of the interior linemen. Could this be the start of the run? Well, not for the Chargers at 16. They select Patrick Payton, the edge rusher out of Florida State, the second Seminole defensive player off the board. And like the first one, I think Pat Payton's going to be a really good player at the next level. 20 sacks over the last 2 years, including 13 this season, and 2 in their first-round playoff game against Texas. 77 overall, hidden development. This fits a need. I think the value is good. This is a really nice pick for the Chargers. I think they're getting an outstanding player. The Indianapolis Colts at number 17 select Jalen Rivers, offensive tackle out of Miami. Another one of the most improved players in this year's class. Coming into the year, I don't think we were looking at a first-rounder, but he only let up 2 sacks. One of the best pass-protecting offensive tackles in the nation. He is already 24 years old, which is not ideal. But to get a potential blindside blocker for the next 7 or 8 years for your star quarterback, Anthony Richardson, makes a lot of sense. Again, I think we could continue to see these offensive linemen fly off the board, but not with this pick. Maxwell Harrison, cornerback out of Kentucky, goes to the Miami Dolphins. They traded away Jalen Ramsey in the last episode. They've made it clear they want to get younger. 76 overall, hidden development for Harrison, a really versatile player who intercepted 4 passes this year. The ball skills improved this season. I thought he was a little bit worse in coverage, though. But regardless, I do like his versatility. I think he suits best in the slot, but he's got the size and physicality to play on the outside. A rare interdivision trade at number 19. The Falcons are giving up their first and second rounder to move up 9 spots with the Panthers. Could this be for Tristan Lay from Clemson? Yes, it is. He was a guy who was projected in the mock draft to go number 4 overall. He was in play to go number 5. So this is a major surprise. He's been really good over the last 2 years at Clemson, but the NFL looks like they got it right with him. He's not a bad player, 74 overall, normal development, but I don't think he's a first-round quality player either. The Falcons are going to need him to start right away. Their offensive tackle situation is pretty rough, so he'll be thrusted into the deep end. Tyler Booker, guard from Alabama, to the 49ers at 20. This is a prospect who was heavily on our radar. I really like Tyler Booker, and I'm disappointed he didn't fall to our pick at number 27. 77 overall with hidden development. He ends up being the first guard off the board, but he might not be the only Alabama offensive guard to go in the first round, as that brings us to the Arizona Cardinals at 21, and sure enough, they would select the right guard from Alabama, Jaden Roberts. And again, I'm disappointed he did not make it to number 27 either. Roberts is a team captain, as is Tyler Booker. He's a little bit better in pass protection than Booker, a little bit worse as a run blocker, but look at this. He is an 83 overall, tied with Caleb Downs as the highest rated players in this year's draft. What a pick for the Arizona Cardinals, getting, quite simply, arguably the best football player in this draft at number 21 overall. So the run on offensive line has happened. Only 1 in the top 14 picks, but we've seen 5 go in the last 7. For a team like us that was targeting an offensive line at number 27, that's not ideal. The Buffalo Bills select Reuben Bain Jr., the edge rusher from Miami at number 22 overall. Doesn't quite have the high sack numbers that Patrick Payton or Nick Scorton does, but he still finished with 10.5 this year, and he's still been a really good player since his true freshman season. I think he's a better run defender than both Payton and Scorton, and I think he's going to pair nicely with another former Miami edge rusher in Gregory Rousseau. He's got the most upside at the top pass rushers, being the youngest of the group, and he has hidden development. The Pittsburgh Steelers at number 23 select Bear Alexander, another defensive lineman, the tackle from USC. A former high recruit, didn't really work out at Georgia, but he's turned into a nice player with the Trojans. He had 9 sacks this year, 8.5 last year. There are some character questions, though. He's played for 6 different schools since he started out in high school, but who better than to be coached by Mike Tomlin, who I think is going to be able to get the best of him. With the 24th pick, the Minnesota Vikings select Nicholas Singleton, running back out of Penn State. Throughout the year, it was a question of who's going to be the top running back off the board between Nick Singleton and Darius Taylor. But with Taylor returning to school, the answer to that question has become pretty obvious. Outside of Taylor, Nick Singleton led the NCAA in rushing yards this year with nearly 1,400, going for 12 scores on the ground and 700 yards after contact. He ran a 4.29 40-yard dash at the combine, one of the fastest players in this year's draft, a 78 overall with hidden development. I think he's going to be a fun duo with the recently signed David Montgomery. With the 25th pick, the Houston Texans select Abdul Carter, edge rusher out of Penn State. Carter has a really high ceiling, but he doesn't have the sack production compared to some of the other top pass rushers in this class. Despite that, he's rated higher than all of them, an 81 overall with hidden development. He only played in 8 games this year and finished with just 4 sacks, but the Texans clearly believe he's going to be a better NFL player than he was college player, and based on his rating, I think they're going to be right. One more pick to go before us. It's Bryce Foster out of Kansas going to the Lions. The first Jayhawk is off the board. I really like what Bryce Foster's done for us on the offensive line over the last couple of years. Started at center as a junior and then moved over to guard for his senior year. Throughout his collegiate career, I never really thought that we'd be looking at a first rounder, but it makes sense given his versatility, given the fact that he is a freak athlete, and given his consistent production over the last couple of years. And that brings up the Broncos here at number 27. So a lot of the pass catchers are still on the board. The offensive linemen have slipped, but I've talked about the idea of also making a splash in terms of adding a big-time receiver. So far, there's only been 1 running back and 1 wide receiver selected. Noah Thomas at number 9 is the only receiver to be picked. All the other receivers are still here, and all of the tight ends, including Oscar Delp from Georgia, are on the board. All of these guys could certainly be in play. There are some good weapons here. London Humphreys, J. Michael Sturdivant, Evan Stewart, Jeremy Bernard, Kendrick Law, 4.24, 40-yard dash. But I also want to look at the idea of maybe picking somebody else, maybe picking an impact defensive player and just making that side of the ball ultra-loaded. Or looking at a trade. Not necessarily a trade down, but trading for a proven veteran. I want to make a big move this offseason. We did promise the media that we would make a splash, and I think using the 27th pick to make that happen would make sense. Now, teams are not going to be willing to throw away their elite offensive linemen. That just doesn't happen. It might be easier to get some receivers, though, and I want to look for someone whose contract is maybe up. And I look at the Lions. They're paying Goff, St. Brown, and Sewell a lot of money. Coming into this year, they need to pay Aiden Hutchinson, Sam Laporta, Frank Ragnow, Brian Branch, Aleem McNeil, eventually Terrion Arnold. So somebody's going to be an odd man out, and I could see it being Sam Laporta. The Lions love Sam Laporta. He's a very talented player, but his numbers over the last 2 years have not met the production that he provided as a rookie. Are the Lions going to be willing to make him one of the top paid tight ends in the NFL? I don't really know. The problem is I don't think we can come to a fair deal. I think given his production, he's probably not worth the 27th pick, but he's definitely worth way more than pick 59. So I figured I would do some more digging on the offensive line. And I actually think Andrew Thomas with the Giants could make some sense. Thomas is one of the best left tackles in the NFL. The Giants gave him a big extension a few years ago, and so far, he hasn't really lived up to it. This season, he allowed 8 sacks. He's missed 5 games in each of the last 2 seasons. And the Giants have him under contract for a while, but most of the money they gave him was not guaranteed. So because of that, they would not have to pay most of the contract if they traded him away. So I think for the right price, they would be willing to do it. And I think pick 27 would be fair. You got to keep in mind, he is 27 years old. He's in the midst of his prime, and he's coming off a pretty bad year. But this is Andrew Thomas. He's one of the better tackles in the NFL, and I'm willing to do it. A deal is done. The Giants are trading Andrew Thomas along with their 4th round selection for pick number 27. So we make our big move on the offensive line. Andrew Thomas will be the starting left tackle of the Denver Broncos for the next 4 years. And I'm really excited about this addition. I don't mind some of the tackles who are left on the board, like Jonas Savaiinaea and Ernest Green. But when you can get a proven guy like this, even with the contract, it's hard to say no. We've got the financial flexibility to pay him, and I'm really excited about this addition. So now, what are the Giants going to do here? It would make sense to pick an offensive tackle. They didn't trade him away based on luxury, so I would guess that's the route they're going to go with, and they would select Jonas Savaiinaea from the University of Arizona. Had I stayed at number 27, I think I probably would have picked Savaiinaea, so I think this is a good move here for the Giants. They're getting a good player, 77 overall, only let up 3 sacks this year, and is a pretty solid run blocker as well. He's not as good as Andrew Thomas right now, but the Giants hope he'll be as good as Thomas in a year or two, and instead of paying him $20 million over the next 4 years, they'll be paying him like $4 million per season in that stretch. Let's round out the first round now. The Carolina Panthers select wide receiver London Humphreys from Georgia. Finally, another receiver is off the board. Humphreys is a late entry to this draft. 6'2", 200 pounds, really productive player for Georgia over the last couple of years. 900-plus yards in each of the last 2 seasons and 10 touchdowns in both as well. Humphreys provides physicality. He provides athleticism. He's really fast at his size. And I think he's going to be a fun fit with Xavier Legette in the Panthers receiving room. The Jaguars select Lander Barton, linebacker out of Utah. I'm a little bit surprised he went in the first round, but I do think he's a good player. He was bunched up with a lot of the other top linebackers in this year's class. It was unclear who would be the first one off the board, but Barton just has another gear athletically that a lot of those other guys don't, and he's got the production to back it up. He'll join forces with another former Utah linebacker in Devin Lloyd. J. Michael Sturdivant goes to the Packers. I really like this pick. We got to see Sturdivant with TCU this year. I think he had over 100 yards in the game against Kansas. And I looked at him as a high-floor receiver who's a good route runner, good hands, solid athlete, but maybe nothing spectacular. But then he ran a 4.36 at the Combine, and I was not expecting him to run that fast, and that time has cemented him in the first round of this year's draft. The transfer from UCLA finished the year with 868 yards and 9 touchdowns for the Horned Frogs. The Packers have a lot of good receivers, but they don't have their number one guy, and they're hoping Sturdivant will do that. At pick 31, the Kansas City Chiefs will select edge rusher Stephen Daly from NC State. This is a kid who's gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. In 2024 as a junior, he had 6 sacks for Kent State, transfers up to NC State, where he just completely explodes onto the scene, finishing with 13 sacks. So his linear improvement suggests that he's going to continue to get better at a pretty quick rate. Everybody in the AFC West focusing on defense with their first-round picks. The Broncos and Raiders get the top 2 corners in this draft, while the Chargers and Chiefs each add pass rushers. At number 32, we've got a trade. The Tennessee Titans have been patiently awaiting to potentially move up for a quarterback. And they wanted to make it happen in the first round so they can get the 5th-year option, making a deal here with the Dallas Cowboys. And ultimately, with the 32nd pick, the Tennessee Titans select Alex Orji, quarterback out of Michigan. Alex Orji has more college football playoff wins at the quarterback position than any other QB ever. The more you think about that stat, the less impressive it gets. But the guy is still 5-1 in playoff games. And sure, his final playoff game this year against Texas A&M did not go well. 3 interceptions, 56% completion percentage, not good. But you can't forget about his good performance against Ohio State this year in the Rose Bowl. And you certainly cannot forget about the 4 playoff wins he had last year, leading 11th-ranked 4-loss Michigan to a national title where he won the playoff MVP. 76 overall, he has the same rating as the number 1 pick, Cade Klubnik, and his development trait is actually better. Orji has superstar, while Klubnik only has star. So it looks like the Titans might have got the second best quarterback in this year's draft. They've got to be really happy with how this first round went. and I feel pretty happy about how it went as well. I was hoping to have a choice between Downs and Wright. I don't know which player I ultimately would have decided. I was just happy that we were able to land one of them. Colin Wright at number 5. And then a surprising move at number 27 with Andrew Thomas via trade from the Giants. That was not the only surprise, though. We saw 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. Cade Klubnik to the Browns, Avery Johnson to the Seahawks, and most surprisingly, Nico Iamaleava to the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's going to bring us into the second round. We still own our own second rounder, 59th overall. For now, I think we're going to hold tight. We made a couple of big moves last year. We ended up picking 3 players in the second round. Marvin Grant, Ashton Genty, and Jeffrey Bassa. I don't know if we have the ammo to do that again, but you never know. We've also got to figure out with what's going to happen with Cam Ward pretty soon as well in Cleveland. With not a lot of quarterbacks left, somebody might get desperate and pull the trigger on a trade for him. Jeremiah Cooper goes to the Browns. 6 interceptions over the last 2 years at Texas and Iowa State. Dalen Everett to Seattle. I like that pick. 78 overall. He's a really good player. Him with Tariq Woolen and Devin Witherspoon. That's going to be a lot of fun. Jihad Campbell to the Cowboys. He has some similarities in his game to Micah Parsons in the way that he can do a little bit of everything. So I like the fit with Dallas. Xavier Nwankpa to the Commanders. Only a 72 overall. Not the best value there. Andrew Gentry, offensive tackle to the Jets. Got to get more guys up front for Jalen Milroe. CJ Basil Jr. led college football in sacks with 19.5. The athletic traits are a little underwhelming, and it reflects in sort of a low rating. So that brings us to the Raiders here with the 7th pick in the round. And as you can see, with the loss of Davante Adams, they could use a receiver. They've got Devin Neal, they've got Brock Bowers, but they don't have a true number 1 receiver. They want to give Jalen Daniels his own version of Luke Grimm from his senior year at Kansas. And I look at the Eagles, who have already made one surprising move today. They drafted a couple really good receivers last year. And I look at a guy like Devontae Smith, who could be expendable. I imagine they're not going to want to trade A.J. Brown. I get that. But Devontae Smith hasn't been some superstar over the last couple of years. I think the 39th pick and a 5th is pretty fair for a guy in Smitty who has had less than 1,000 yards in each of the last 2 years. But he is still a fringe top 10 receiver in the NFL. You got to give quite a bit to land a player as talented as him. But now Devontae Smith is in our division, and the Eagles make another surprising move. They're back on the clock, clearly trying to reshuffle things after a disappointing season, and they select Thomas Davis. This is a good pick, one of the highest-rated players left on the board. A little bit undersized as a pass rusher, but otherwise he's really good, 79 overall. Evan Stewart to the Buccaneers. I'm really intrigued by what he's going to add to their offense. An explosive playmaker for quarterback Connor Wegman. Stewart was supposed to be a top pick last year, returned to school, was disappointing, but played really well in the playoff for Oregon, helping lead them to a championship. Got a couple of interior offensive linemen going with Dylan Fairchild to the Rams and then Jake Slaughter to the Patriots. I'm surprised he went this high, and I'm surprised Georgia tight end Oscar Delp has not been picked. Jeremy Bernard to the Giants was a Heisman finalist for most of the year, disappointed down the stretch and did not show up at the combine, having him fall down a little bit, but he still goes here in the second. Barium Brown to the Vikings. I see him more as a gadget guy, but a really fun one at that. Very explosive player. And finally, Oscar Delp off the board to the Bengals. It turns out the NFL got this one wrong. Oscar Delp is a damn monster, and there was no reason for him to slip this far. He's an 80 overall. He's going to be one of the better tight ends in the league immediately. And now the Bengals have another really good weapon to throw the ball to. Nearly 1,000 yards at the tight end position this year for Delp, who has some similarities to another Georgia tight end in Brock Bowers, who was picked 12th. Not sure why he fell this far. Ernest Green goes to the Bears, a versatile offensive lineman who's raw but has some upside. Chicago clearly focused on improving their line. Wendell Moe, a late entry to the draft, goes to the Saints. Their top 2 picks on the offensive line. Tyrell Raby to the Chargers. Had 7 interceptions this year for Middle Tennessee State. I really like what the Chargers have done. I think they've got 2 really solid players. The Colts are up here. I feel like they're an obvious receiver team, but they go with Gentry Williams, corner out of Oklahoma. He's a track guy, but he's really raw. His rating is quite low. Kevin Winston to the Dolphins, another defensive back, and he's a good one, 78 overall. Kendrick Law to the Panthers, much like Gentry Williams, speed, but his rating is kind of low. Nonetheless, the Panthers are going to have a really fun receiver group next year with him and their first-rounder London Humphreys. Andrew Madrigal to the Niners, Wade Woodaz to the Cardinals. That's a fun pick. I like him quite a bit. The Buffalo Bills select Jayshon Barnum, linebacker out of Michigan, so they're focused on improving the front seven. Trey Moore goes to the Steelers, a really good finesse rusher. The Vikings get Cameron Robinson. I thought he had a really good game in the first round of the playoff against Ohio State. And speaking of guys who played well in the playoff, Cassius Howell to the Miami Dolphins, and it turns out he is the real deal. 77 overall hidden development. Going into the playoff, I think he had 6.5 sacks. He was projected to go in the 7th round, but he took over. He had 9 sacks in the 3 playoff games that he played in. He had a good showing at the Combine, and it turns out he does belong here in the 2nd round. The Miami Dolphins are getting a really talented player. And speaking of talent, TJ Parker has a chance to be one of the best players in this draft. 75 overall, superstar development, only 21 years old. He was a guy I was eyeing up with this pick. So I'm a little disappointed he was chosen. I'm not sure if I would have picked him, but I definitely would have thought about it. So ultimately, we don't move up into the 2nd round, and I don't think we're going to move down either. I think I see a guy who I like. The obvious need here is wide receiver, especially with the amount that have gone in this round. Only 2 slated to go in the top 100 with Chris Brazzle and Zariah Beeson. A lot of tight ends still here. We don't have our long-term tight end on the roster. Is this where we get one? With the 59th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Chris Brazzle II, wide receiver out of the University of Tennessee. So it is a pass catcher, and we will go chalk here. Chris Brazzle is by far the highest projected receiver left in the draft, and I'm for it. I think he's a better prospect than a number of these other receivers who went earlier than him in the 2nd round. I did not think Brazzle was going to enter this draft, though, and when I saw him declare, I was a little bit surprised. But as I look at the skill set, I'm really intrigued by this young man. 6'5", 195 pounds. He's tall and he's wiry. He's somebody who really excels on crossing routes up the middle of the field, which is a lot of what we like to run. He's one of the best separators in this draft. He knows how to get open. He's a good route runner. Inconsistent hands, but if he improves that, I think he could be really good. He can stretch the field a little bit too. He isn't some insane speed threat, but he had some long touchdowns this year for Tennessee. 40 time a little bit above 4.5, which for a guy at 6'5", it's hard to complain with that. And the production was really solid this year. He became Nico Iamaleava's top target with 70 catches for nearly 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns in his first year as a starter with Tennessee after a couple years at Tulane prior to transferring before the 2024 season. He has hidden development, but I do think he is still very much a work in progress, especially in terms of improving his hands. I do like his ability as a route runner, and I think he's a great separator. A 74 overall, considering the juiced draft class ratings, is a little bit on the lower side, but that's fine. The receivers have been flying off the board. If we want to get a guy who we think is quite good, we had to do it now. It might take a little bit of time for Brazzle to see the field, but I think he's got a shot to be a long-term starter here, and he offers us something at receiver that we don't already have with his size and physicality. Reuben Owens to the Panthers. They're looking to add a dynamic duo at running back with him and Jonathan Brooks. Mason Randolph, the center out of Boise State, goes to the Dolphins. And then the Cardinals are moving up with Green Bay, giving away their 3rd and 4th rounders to move up late in the 2nd round. And Arizona is going to go for a little bit of a surprise. Despite making the playoffs this year with a strong end of the year by Kyler Murray, they select Drew Aller, quarterback at Penn State. He's only a 70 overall with normal development, which does not look great. But Aller does have some redeeming physical qualities, 92 throw power. Only was intercepted twice this year, but his accuracy was a little bit spotty. He's not going to have to start right away, though. He'll be able to develop behind Kyler Murray with the Cardinals. The Kansas City Chiefs select LT Overton, another defensive lineman, pairing him up with Stephen Daly, who they picked in the 1st round. And then the Cowboys get Sendalio Cortez Jr., a small school guy from Morehead State University. So that wraps up the 2nd round. Only one quarterback, Drew Aller, going to the Cardinals. We ultimately stick with our selection, picking wide receiver Chris Brazzle II, who will look to fight for reps on the depth chart, competing for playing time with guys like Tez Johnson and Troy Franklin. That brings us into the 3rd round. We have our own 3rd rounder, number 91 overall. But again, you guys know me. I'm not opposed to moving up or down, although we haven't traded up or down unless you count the Andrew Thomas trade as such. All these tight ends are continuing to fall. That is a need for us. Some of the quarterbacks are continuing to fall. I also mentioned that I would like to draft a quarterback at some point. It's just a matter of when. Let's see what happens early in the 3rd. I really like this first pick by the Browns, Toriano Pride Jr., who led the NCAA this year with 9 interceptions, including one thrown by Clyde Poole all the way back in week 2. He's got phenomenal ball skills, but is a little bit inconsistent in coverage. They were linked to Avion Terrell, who's a slightly better version of Pride, but I would rather get Toriano Pride in the 3rd round than Avion Terrell with the number 1 pick. There's only a few certainties in life: death, taxes, Jung-Hoo Lee opposite field hits, and the Seattle Seahawks drafting a running back on day 2. Zach Charbonnet hasn't quite developed into the guy they had hoped for, and they believe that Justice Haynes from Alabama can form a nice tandem with Kenneth Walker III. So Haynes is the selection to Seattle, joining forces with the rookie quarterback Avery Johnson. Jacob Rodriguez to the Titans, Inez Cooper to Washington, really the only guard left projected in this range. Keon Sabb to the Jets. He'll pair up with his former Alabama teammate at safety in Malachi Moore, who they drafted last year. Aronde Gadsden II to the Bears, the talented tight end from Syracuse. I think the Bears have had a nice draft. Emil Wagner to the Raiders, adding to the offensive line. And we've got a trade here at pick 72. The Denver Broncos are moving up, and we're not using our 3rd rounder to make this happen. We're going to use the 4th rounder that we got from the Giants in the Andrew Thomas trade, along with our 4th rounder next year, to move up for this selection. Giving up 2 4s is a lot, but there's a player I really want. I think he's got a very high ceiling. So with the 72nd pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Francis Mauigoa, offensive tackle out of the University of Miami. Yes, we traded for Andrew Thomas. Yes, we signed Rasheed Walker. But I would like to take another swing on the offensive line because I think this kid has really high upside. I thought about Logan Brown here from Kansas. I like Logan Brown quite a bit. He's going to be the better player early on, but Mauigoa's ceiling is really high. The problem is that he is quite raw, and it's going to take a while for him to develop. I view him as a redshirt candidate. He's not going to play this year. He's probably not going to play next year, and he might not even play the following year. But when you watch him, you see this guy who just mauls people in the run game. Really, really good run blocker right off the bat. And if he were to be in the game, I'd be confident with him when we're running the ball. The problem is he's got a ways to go as a pass protector. I thought last year he was pretty solid as a pass blocker, and coming into the year he was projected to go in the 1st round, but he was not good protecting the quarterback. He allowed 11 sacks. That's a lot. He's the 183rd ranked player in the draft. This is a 6th round talent who he drafted in the 3rd round, and you know what? I feel darn good about it because the ceiling with this kid is really, really high. Former 5-star recruit who has elite athletic traits. The way he's able to move in space, the way he's able to maul people moving forward in the run game is special. He's only a 72 overall. He's not going to start ahead of Andrew Thomas and Rasheed Walker. He's not going to be our top backup tackle. That's Mike McGlinchey. He won't even be next in line. That would be Nick Gargiulo. He's our 5th offensive tackle right now, and again, he's not going to play as a rookie, except for maybe blowouts and whatnot, or maybe special teams. But he's only 21 years old. He's one of the youngest players in the draft, and I think he's got the upside to be a Pro Bowl level starter, but he's got a long ways to go in his development. Regardless, players at his ceiling don't fall to the 3rd round, which is why I felt like I needed to trade up. Jean-Michael Geilenborg to the Rams, the tight end from Wyoming. I like him quite a bit. He was a guy I would have considered with our 2nd pick in this round had he fallen. Logan Brown to New England. He's a 77 overall. He's better than Mauigoa. He's also 2 years older, though, and doesn't quite have the ceiling. Shamar James goes to the Giants, and then we've got a trade here with Washington. This will be the Cam Ward destination. He will fetch a mid-3rd rounder from the Commanders. Washington did not want to use a high pick on a quarterback because Jaden Daniels had a really good rookie year. But he was really bad last year, and Washington's doing this to try to light a fire under him, and in case he just happened to peak as a rookie, they have a backup plan with Cam Ward. Sonny Styles goes to the Browns, linebacker from Ohio State. Bengals finally pick a pass rusher with Ethan Burke. Benjamin Brahmer, the tight end from Iowa State, to New England. Kendall Daniels, big safety out of Oklahoma State, to New Orleans. The Browns get Blake Miller, offensive tackle from Clemson. The Colts get Jaron Kanak, linebacker from Oklahoma. Raw player, but really impressive athlete, high character guy. I'm surprised they haven't picked a receiver yet, though. Deontay Lawson to the Dolphins. Will Jados to the Panthers. Screw defense, right? The Panthers have used all 4 of their picks on offense. Davis and Igbinosun to the Niners. They lost Travarius Ward in free agency. There are higher-ranked corners left on the board, but they think Igbinosun is going to be more ready to go. They want somebody who's going to start day one. Jordan White to the Packers, a 79 overall offensive guard. Devin Eastern to the Bills. Ephesians Prysock, the 6'4" physical corner to the Steelers. They turned Brandon Stevens into a Pro Bowler, so who knows what they can do with Prysock. Speaking of Brandon Stevens' former team, the Ravens get Le'Veon Moss, an 80 overall running back from Texas A&M. He's 24 years old. He's 3 years older than his A&M counterpart Ruben Owens. But it looks like he'll be a little bit more ready to go off the bat. The Texans picked tight end Jack Velling and another pass catcher with Troy receiver Zariah Beeson. He scored 40% of the time he had the ball this year, but he's 24 years old. He's not the most athletic. He didn't play against the best of competition. There are a lot of red flags in Beeson's game. But some guys just know how to play football, and Zariah Beeson is one of them. He is an 80 overall, and as good as he is, I question when he's going to see the field, because the Texans have Nico Collins, they signed Jamison Williams, they have Tank Dell, they have Stephon Diggs. Diggs is regressing quite a bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're not looking to extend Tank Dell, so I guess Beeson is the guy who's going to replace Dell as their smaller guy who can still win on the outside and has great ability after the catch. Beeson, again, 24 touchdowns with just 58 receptions this year. That is remarkable efficiency. And that brings up the Denver Broncos here with the 27th pick in the third round. And again, I don't see a need for a trade here. There's a guy I like. I think we're going to stick and pick. With the 91st pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Harold Fannin Jr., tight end out of Bowling Green University. So we are going to pick the guy who we hope will be our long-term tight end in Harold Fannin. We tried to sign Isaiah Likely, didn't work. We thought about trading for Sam Laporta, didn't work. Well, third time's the charm. In what is a loaded tight end class, I felt like I could wait a little bit for a guy like Fannin here in the third round. 6'4", 230 pounds. He's got the body. He's got the athleticism that you look for in a tight end prospect. This is somebody who can obviously catch the ball, a really solid receiver. He is a good route runner, and he's got excellent hands, some of the best in this tight end class. I think he's one of the better blockers in this tight end class as well. So the fact that he's going to be valuable when we're running the ball or when he's not running a pass pattern makes him a really good all-around player. Fannin missed some time this year, but he still finished with nearly 500 yards this year. Very consistent production over the last couple of seasons, but I think the ceiling is higher for him. This is a former one-star recruit who was not highly ranked out of high school, obviously, grinded, and turned into one of the better Group 5 tight ends over the last 3 years, and his rating is top 40 in this year's class. Not to mention, he has hidden development trait. So far, we're 4 for 4 on development traits, even though our 2 other day 2 picks are not the highest rated. We've gotten a lot of high upside players. As for Fannin, he has a high rating and a good development trait. He's a 77 overall, the same rating as Jonnu Smith. I think Smith will go into the year as the starter, but Harold Fannin's going to get some reps. And if he outplays him, we're not going to be afraid to make the switch. I'm really hoping that him and Bo Nix can have a similar connection to what we saw with Puma Whitlock and Isaiah Likely in the Dragons series last year. To round out the third round, Lucky Sutton, running back to the Falcons. Really good pass catcher. I think he'll complement Bijan Robinson nicely. Parker Brailsford goes to the Jaguars. Ty Buchanan to the Green Bay Packers. The Kansas City Chiefs select Zane Durant, a breakout star for the Penn State defense. A third defensive lineman for the Chiefs. They're really focused on that. And then Lee Hunter to the Cowboys, only a 71 overall with that last pick. So a pretty exciting third round. We trade our next 2 4s to move up for Francis Mauigoa out of Miami. One of the lowest rated players who's been drafted so far, but one of the highest upside players we've seen. And then Harold Fannin, a guy who has a chance to make a real impact for us this year as a rookie and potentially overtake Jonnu Smith as the starting tight end. So that brings us to day 3 of the NFL Draft, and obviously we're going to continue to move things quicker. Some surprises. Miller Moss is still on the board. Who would have thought after throwing 50 touchdowns that he makes it to the 4th round? Haynes Kenya still here. Some of the corners, including Julian Humphrey and Terrence Brooks, have fallen quite a bit. Some good playmakers, including Tyler Williams and Roberto Miranda, are still here. Ernest Hausman, the talented linebacker, still on the board. As of now, we don't have a lot of day 3 draft capital. We have the Rams pick in the 5th round from the Cortland Sutton deal. And we have 3 picks in the 7th round, but as of now, that's it. We'll see if there's any movement here in the 4th round. We'll start with a big trade. I talked about the idea of potentially seeing Tank Dell on the move, and it is the Washington Commanders who will make it happen. They already traded away their 3rd rounder for Cameron Ward, but keep in mind they got that 3rd rounder from Jonathan Allen. Now they're going to trade their 4th rounder this year and their 3rd next year for Dell, who's a good player, but I think that's a fair return for the Texans given that they were not planning to extend him. Ben Roberts, linebacker from Texas Tech to the Browns, high floor guy, missed the combine, but I think he's going to be a good pro, and I really like Ernest Hausmann with Seattle. A guy who did not have a great season this year, but he's played really well in all of the playoff games that we've watched him. And look at this, Haynes King to the Dallas Cowboys at pick 99, and I think Dallas might have landed another steal at quarterback in the 4th round. They picked Dak Prescott here 10 years ago. He's turned into a good player, and I think Haynes King will as well. 78, the 2nd highest rated quarterback in the class. He's rated higher than Cade Klubnik, the number 1 pick. Now you got to keep in mind, he's 25 years old. The ceiling is limited, but he's played really well over the last couple of years. Last season as a junior, the Heisman favorite the first half of the year before slowing down. This year he missed the first half of the year with an injury, but played well afterwards, not throwing an interception all year. Going through the rest of the 4th round, some other notable picks include the Bears double dipping on safety with Nick Emanwari and Bryce Anderson, the latter of whom I like quite a bit. Anderson played well in the playoff, had a big interception in the national championship game in the loss against Oregon, but his stock went up in that playoff run. Taylon Green, quarterback out of Arkansas to the Niners. What is going on with Miller Moss? Do teams really not like him? He threw 50 touchdowns this year, for Christ's sake, and nearly won the Heisman. 50 touchdowns normally gets you in the top 5. Miller Moss is here on day 3. Shaheem Brown to the Steelers. He had a good playoff run in the 2 games that Florida State played. Shamar Stewart to the Eagles. I know it says Shamar Turner, but the Texas A&M defensive line has 2 players named Shamar. Shamar Turner in this series was drafted last year, 9th overall by the Panthers. This is Shamar Stewart. I typed his name wrong, but I will make sure to fix it before the start of the year. Jalen Walker to the Saints. High upside, low floor pass rusher. I think he could be a good player. Damian George to the Colts. I think he's talented. Corey Foreman, former number 1 recruit, now at the University of Oregon. He's turned into a good rotational pass rusher. The Dolphins pick another edge rusher here, Julian Simon. Undersized player from UConn, but highly productive this year. And speaking of undersized pass rushers, Elijah Herring had 13 sacks a year ago, goes to the Packers. And then here's Miller Moss. It looks like the NFL got this one right. He's only a 72 overall. His accuracy and his athletic traits don't look like they'll translate to the next level, which is a surprise because he was such a good player this year at USC. Again, 50 touchdowns, and being the Heisman favorite for most of the year, you would think makes you a good prospect. But NFL teams read through it. I do think he'll be a good backup, though, for the Bills behind Josh Allen, and I think he will have a role in this league for quite a while. Miles Mendezun, 16.5 sacks this year at Iowa State, goes to the Chargers. I guess teams don't believe in the sack production translating to the next level. Armand Membo, tackle from Missouri, goes to the Falcons. Ty Thompson to the Jags. That's an interesting one. As a junior in 2024, Thompson was really good. And I think with a solid year this year, he could have been a top 50 pick, but an NIL dispute kept him off the field. Teams didn't like that, and he slips all the way to the end of the 4th. Some of the best players were picked right at the end. Kavorian Barnes, running back UTSA to the Chiefs. He's a 77 overall. And then Devin Dye, going to the Cowboys. Unfortunately for us, this is who I was planning to pick with our selection coming up in the 5th round. Not a great athlete, but an instinctive, talented football player. The Cowboys drafted the 2 best players in the round, with 78 overall Haynes King and 78 overall Devin Dye, both of whom have hidden, I believe, star for both, development. So that'll bring us into the 5th round. We ultimately don't travel into the 4th. If I knew Devin Dye was going to go, I might have. I didn't think he was going to go this early. But there are still some good players. The corners are really slipping. I'm surprised Julian Humphrey has made it this far. Terrence Brooks, Sione Lalea, Jeremiah Irby, all guys I thought would have been long gone at that position by now. But we don't need corner. We've got plenty. Marvin Jones, the pass rusher out of Florida State to the Browns. I thought he looked good in the playoffs. Helped improve his stock quite a bit. Dylan Edwards, running back from Kansas State to the Titans. I know he's a rival, but after Devin Dye, he was the next guy up on my board. Not as highly rated as Dye. I think he only has normal development, so we didn't quite miss out as much. But I thought he would have been a fun addition for our offense. Jalen Kilgore, 75 overall. I think superstar development and only 21 years old to the Rams. What a pick. He's a baller who just didn't test very well at the Combine. R.J. Maryland to the Jets at tight end from SMU. He's a fun player. VJ Payne, another Kansas State guy. Boo. Goes to the Raiders, and that brings us on the clock with Marcus Embo to the Bears. With the 137th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback out of LSU. I said I wanted to pick a quarterback at some point in the draft. Here we go. I saw some of the comments on the draft preview. Some of you guys thought we should have picked somebody earlier, maybe an Alex Orji to sit behind Bo Nix. But that would have required us to use a first-round pick on one. And given how well Bo Nix played this past season, that just was not something I was really interested in. I have a lot of faith in Bo Nix to be the long-term guy. Seeing him outplay Josh Allen in the playoff game, that moved me. I'm not going to lie. But I think picking a guy like Garrett Nussmeier here makes sense. A highly productive quarterback at LSU who's been pushed down the board largely because this QB class is super good. He has some of the best arm talent in this year's class. He can absolutely sling it down the field. He's pretty solid as a runner. His accuracy isn't perfect, but it's not bad. And I think he's got a high floor as a backup, and maybe there is some upside to his game given the athletic traits and production. This year, 39 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. His completion percentage went down quite a bit, but he was pushing the ball down the field more than he did a year ago. He only has normal development, so it doesn't look like he's got a great chance to be some starter. But I think as a backup and another guy to have in the quarterback room, this isn't a bad pick. 71 overall with normal development. So Bo Nix's job will not be in any jeopardy with Nussmeier here. But knock on wood, if something were to happen with Bo Nix, I would feel somewhat okay with Garrett Nussmeier playing a few games if it came down to that. So there you go. We got our quarterback, and we still have not picked a defensive player since Colin Wright, 5th overall. We picked defense early, and since then we have focused all on the offense. Moving forward, Dante Corraleone, I think, is a good value pick, the defensive tackle out of Cincinnati, going to the New York Giants. Casey Smith, small school guy, Arkansas Pine Bluff at linebacker to the Bengals. Sawyer Robertson, quarterback from Baylor to the Bucs. His rating is quite a bit better than Nussmeier, and he's also younger, so we might have picked the wrong quarterback. The Bucs now have Robertson and Connor Wegman in their QB room with Baker Mayfield. Could this be shades of RG3 and Kirk Cousins in Washington? Perhaps. Micah Morris, the guard out of Georgia to the Chargers, I considered him at 137. Andres Salazar from Abilene Christian, a young raw safety to the Panthers, who finally draft a defensive player. It took the entire draft practically for them to do that. Drew Shelton to the Niners. They've picked a lot of offensive linemen. It clearly looks like they want to add some beef up front. Matthew McDoom, corner out of Georgia to the Steelers. The fact that Julian Humphrey is continuing to slip, now I feel like that's a real concern with the other corner from Georgia, McDoom, who was projected way later than him, getting picked. Tobias Merriweather, another receiver, goes to the Texans. And finally, the fall for Julian Humphrey comes to a close. And to be honest, I don't really know why he slipped this far. It's not like Benjamin Morrison last year, where Morrison was supposed to go in the first round. But also the fact that Morrison kind of deserved it. He was only a 72 overall. Julian Humphrey's a 75. He's a good player. And leave it to the Eagles to draft a slipping player from the University of Georgia, who's probably going to become a really good player in that defense with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Tyler Williams to the Jags. This is a guy I like quite a bit. 73 years, no, not 73 years old. He'd be in a retirement home. 21 years old, 73 overall, hidden development. If I had not picked Chris Brazzle in the second round, Tyler Williams would probably be a Bronco. He's not going to have to play right away because the Jags have a deep receiving core, but they recognize Tyreek Hill and Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis are not going to be around forever. They think Williams and Brian Thomas Jr. could be a nice tandem for the future. To round out the fifth, Aaron Graves, another defensive lineman to the Chiefs. That's at least their fourth. And then Mason Taylor, the son of legendary Dolphin pass rusher Jason Taylor. It was the selection by the Tennessee Titans, who for a second year in a row, I feel like are winning the draft. And I feel like it's only a matter of time until they are going to become a scary team in the AFC. We did not enter the day with a pick in the fifth round, and we're not going to leave with one. That brings us into round 6. We're going to move a little bit faster here, I think. We also don't have a pick, at least as of right now, here in round 6. But I do want to go through some highlights in the round that I want to mention. So we're going to simulate about 20-some picks up. Some of the highlights include Joseph Manjack from Kansas going to the Jets, 74 overall, normal development. Manjack really improved as the season went along this year for Kansas, and he wrapped it up in the bowl game with an incredible performance, 11 catches, 3 touchdowns. He was a really fun player to have, as was Sevion Morrison, who's going to pair up with Jordan James in the Browns' backfield. And despite being a 6th rounder, I think he's got a pretty clear path to playing time, being the 2nd best running back in the room. Some other picks I want to go over include Terrence Brooks to Seattle, really good value pick at corner. Abu Sama III, running back to the Bears, very talented player from Iowa State. A lot of the corners and a lot of the receivers who were falling are finally being picked. Jaden Lucas to Washington. Paul Green to the Raiders. Sione Laulea to the Bucks. Tobogo Tate to the Bengals. And then maybe my favorite storyline is Georgia running back Trevor Etienne going to the Jaguars. I was eyeing Etienne up with one of our 3 picks in the 7th round, but this is honestly a cooler scenario where he gets to join the running back room with his brother Travis Etienne. Some of the highest rated players here include some of the other running backs. 76 overall Dylan Sampson to the Bengals. 76 CJ Donaldson to the Ravens. 78 Sade Clayton Johnson to the Lions. And then I also want to highlight Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, who looked like he was going to be a first-round pick at one point in time. Held out this year due to a medical condition. He slips all the way to the 6th. The Steelers will take a chance on him, as that brings us to the 7th. There's DJ Giddens, the other Kansas State running back, and that brings us up. With the 195th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Javon McIntyre, defensive back out of the University of Kansas. It was only a matter of time until I was going to pick one of my Jayhawks. It took us nearly the entire draft to do it, but it is Javon McIntyre who has made it all the way to the 7th round. So when we got McIntyre out of the portal last year from Pitt, I said that he was going to play the Marvin Grant role as the strong safety who's making plays in the run game, can be solid in coverage, and it took McIntyre a little bit to get good, but as the season went along, I feel like he got a lot more comfortable within the defense. Had 1 interception, this one against Utah, and he forced a pair of fumbles, including a big one here in the 4th quarter against TCU. And then he had one in the bowl game against UTSA on the quarterback, where he just completely laid him out. McIntyre finished with over 80 tackles this year. He forced the 3 turnovers, only 2 TFLs, but he wasn't in the backfield too often. But I want to go back to the point of him playing the Marvin Grant role. That's what he did at Kansas, and I think now he's the perfect backup to Marvin Grant, who's already on our roster. Marvin Grant missed a few games at the end of the year, so having a guy like Javon McIntyre here will soften the blow a little bit. He's only a 75 overall with normal development, but I think he fits really well. So that is the first of our 3 7th rounders. We're also picking at 206 and 214. And honestly, I think it makes the most sense to just keep those picks and select 2 players. I thought about moving up, but why not just get as many shots at the dartboard as possible? A notable selection in between our last 2 picks is Dylan Brooks, the Kansas edge rusher, going to number 200 to the Buccaneers. With the 206th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Ross Ulugalu Maseuli, center from San Diego State University. So once again, we're adding to the offensive line. I wanted to make some big moves on the offensive line this offseason, and we did that. Sign Rasheed Walker, trade for Andrew Thomas, trade up for Francis Mauigoa, and now we get Ross Ulugalu Maseuli. He's a pretty good run blocker and a very rapidly improving pass protector. Allowed 7 sacks as a junior, but only let up 2 this year as a senior. His linear development with the Aztecs has been really fun to watch, and that leaves me to believe that he's going to continue to get better pretty quickly at the next level. We drafted another center in the 7th round last year in Gus Hartwig, but unlike Hartwig, Ross Ulugalu Maseuli has hidden development. He's only a 69 overall. Nice. And by his rating, he arguably should not have been drafted. But given his development, I think there might be something here. He doesn't need to start right away. I feel good with Sam Mustipher being the starting center again. But Ulugalu Maseuli has some potential, and there's a chance we just got our long-term starting center here in the 7th round. So with that, we only have 1 more pick to go at 214. Who will be the last selection for us today? With the 214th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Gavin Sawchuk, running back out of Oklahoma. I've been wanting to pick a running back for a while. I thought about moving up for some of those other day 3 guys like Abu Sama. I thought about Sade Clayton Johnson. I thought about Trevor Etienne. But we're going to look at Sawchuk, who declared for the draft after his redshirt junior season with the Sooners. And he's a really fascinating player because after a strong freshman season, I thought he was on a fast track to being a top 50 pick. He was a little bit disappointing last year as a sophomore, but coming into this year, he was still slated as a top projected 100 pick in the draft. But he just happened to have another disappointing season. His stock continued to go down. He didn't have a good showing at the combine. He didn't test that well, running in the mid 4.4s, which, while it's not bad, it's a lot slower than people expected. There are some character questions with him as well. Look at him on this touchdown. Nice play, but chooses to intimidate the ref for whatever reason. Scouts felt like that he didn't do well in the interview process. He showed up to the combine overweight. That kind of stuff is going to get you to fall down the board. But I see the talent that this young man has, and I figure, why not take a shot? He hasn't played up to his overall rating over the last couple of years, but he hasn't been bad. 16 rushing touchdowns. He's averaged around 800 yards on the ground and a little under 5 yards per carry. But still, for being the highest rated running back in the country last year, he just was not good enough. 72 overall, normal development. I think there's a chance he has a big role this year. With Javonte Williams gone, I'm not really sure what the rest of the running back room is going to look like in terms of usage behind Ashton Genty. We still have to sign some guys back, and I plan on retaining Zamir White, Harrison Whaley, and Rasul Faishon, who are all currently in free agency. But Gavin Sawchuk could theoretically pass all of those guys on the depth chart. To wrap up the draft, Jeremiah Irby from Boise State, finally off the board. He was projected to go in the 4th round. Another guy who fell a while is Preston Stone, the SMU quarterback. Guys projected lower than him went earlier. He'll stay in the state of Texas, joining the Houston Texans. Malcolm Hartzog, 74 overall corner, really good value pick to the Browns. And then with just a few picks to go, Demetrius Crownover to the Jaguars, Xavier Thomas, small, shifty receiver out of LSU to the Packers, LaQuint Allen, running back from Syracuse to the Chiefs. And that brings us to Mr. Irrelevant, who will the Dallas Cowboys pick with the 224th pick in the draft. A lot of receivers and corners left. Kansas Jayhawks, Moody Rubin, and Avante Dickerson amongst the names at the top of the list who are still on the board. So with the 224th pick, Mr. Irrelevant, we don't know who it's going to be. But we'll find out in just a moment as we go through the selections in the 7th round. So we ended up with 3 players. Javon McIntyre, one of the highest rated players in the round. Ross Ulugalu Maseuli, one of the lower rated guys, but he's got a development trait. And then Gavin Sawchuk, one of the more high-profile players drafted in the 7th round. And Mr. Irrelevant ends up being Teddy Proshizaka, a left tackle from Nebraska. So overall, a really fun draft. The quarterback drama was certainly interesting, and I think we made out quite well. We added an all-pro level tackle in Andrew Thomas. We added what I think will be an all-pro level corner in Colin Wright, and we added a lot of upside otherwise. Last year's rookie class was headlined by the amount of early contributors, and I don't think that's quite going to be the case this year. Colin Wright should start right away, but I'm not sure if any of these other guys will. Chris Brazzle will likely have a limited role this year. Francis Mauigoa is going to redshirt entirely, and outside of Harold Fannin, I'm not sure if any of these later picks, other than maybe Gavin Sawchuk, or due to an injury, that any of those guys are going to get on the field. I want to highlight some of my favorite drafts. In terms of rating, it looks like Cade Klubnik was a little bit overhyped, and the Browns might have picked the wrong quarterback between him and Avery Johnson, but I think Klubnik's got a chance to be good. And the rest of this draft, they did really well. They had a lot of picks, and they nailed most of them. The Eagles certainly had a controversial day, trading up for a quarterback and Nico Iamaleava, and then trading away Devontae Smith. Nonetheless, I feel like they felt that their roster is not positioned to make a Super Bowl run, so they needed to shift their cards a little bit. The Titans were my draft winners last year, and I think they won it again. Caleb Downs is going to be one of the best safeties in the league right away, and then Alex Orji has a chance to be one of the best quarterbacks in this draft. I thought Houston did really well. I don't know why they feel the need to have 7 pass catchers, but they drafted a lot of good ones. Tobias Merriweather, 76. Tron Grizzle, 77 in the 7th round. And then I think the overall biggest winners have to be the Seattle Seahawks. Avery Johnson, 21 years old, 80 overall. Superstar X Factor. The only X Factor, again, that I'm aware of in this draft. Dalen Everett, 78. Justice Haynes, 79. Ernest Hausman, 75. Terrence Brooks in the 6th. DJ Giddens in the 7th. Holy moly, did they do well. So in terms of our draft class, a lot of our guys are rated lower than some of the other classes, but again, I was really focused on upside and getting guys who could be really good down the line with development, particularly on day 2, with Brazzle and Maui Noah, while, again, getting 2 high-impact contributors with Andrew Thomas via trade, and of course, Colin Wright, who I believe will be the right pick, number 5 overall. I'm sorry, that one was horrible. Anyway, let's take a look at our schedule, shall we? We did not have any primetime games last year, and when we were 2-5, I was worried that would be the case again. But when you win 9 of your last 10 regular season games, people want to see you on national television. Week 1, Monday night, at home, against the New England Patriots. That'll be a fun game. We get the Chiefs early this year in Week 2, and then on the road in Week 7. After that, back-to-back primetime games. Monday night in LA against the Chargers. Sunday night, playoff rematch against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. We play the Chargers again, then we have our bye week. I like having a late bye week. Monday night versus the Texans. Sunday night at the Dolphins. And we play the Raiders, both games late in the year, weeks 14 and 18 after the bye week. So that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. A long one, but a fun one. Obviously, a lot goes into these draft episodes, so I would appreciate if you could leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, of course, as well. Next episode, we're going to go through the preseason and play Week 1 against the New England Patriots. And unlike last year, we're not going to have to wait 2 weeks because, as I'm probably going to mention in the pinned comment, there are some issues with downloading the draft class file, unfortunately, but thankfully, they did not affect the pre-existing file that I already had here. Hope everyone enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.